The saga is complete. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. An uncommon model was listed on Reverb, so I dropped the guy an offer and said, hey, if it ever comes to this price, let me know. About a week later, I get the message giving me the okay. What do we have today? It's another Maple Fretboard Les Paul Custom. What is going on here, Trogly? Why do we keep reviewing the exact same guitar? Trust me, this one's different from the one that had the piezo pickup on it, from the one with no inlays. This time, my friends, it's that mid-80s version I was talking about that has the mahogany neck. That's right, after today, we'll have documented all three versions. If you happen to have missed those other episodes, let's do a quick recap. When did Gibson first start to utilize maple fretboards on a Les Paul Custom? Well, it actually happened at the exact same time when the maple neck started to transition into main production. So we're talking late 1974 into 75. So the initial ones have the maple neck with the maple fretboard. They're very traditional looking, and that's how they pretty well existed from 1975 till about 1979. Can you find some 1980s and 81s? Yes, but the whole 76 to 79 is the peak era of them. But then there's a resurgence of them around 85, 86, and that's the exact same period of time when the company is being sold and Henry J's team takes over in 1986. So looking at our serial number, this one is an 86, so it's technically a completely different era for Gibson. However, things didn't really start to change that much for the Les Paul Custom until the late 80s, and especially into the 90s. So yeah, it's not technically Norland, but this early, there's not many differences. But 1982, we transition into the mahogany neck, as I've been telling you, but you might notice, hey, we do not have the volute on here. Something else I can't show you is we now have 9-hole weight relief get introduced. You've got the CNC routes within the machines instead of being drill runs. We can finally document one that is not a pancake body. Will it have the mystery pancake layer under here? I guess we'll find out on the workbench. But here they are side by side so you can see the differences. Obviously, wood quality changes throughout the years as well, so that's another difference on them. But this one's so much lighter, it's ridiculous. But mahogany neck, no volute versus maple neck volute. And you also see the tuners have changed. And your Gibson logos are ever so slightly different as well. So they are very vastly different guitars. But outside of the mid-80s run, you really don't see these again till about 2011 outside of a custom order. And the reason for that, it's the Richlite era. Some dealers wanted to offer a real wood alternative because some customers were complaining. So that's when you get the rosewood fretboards like on the Sweetwater, Modern Beauties, as well as maple. However, in that era, they are not lacquered like they are on the two original runs. But another cool thing about the mid-80s runs is you should have Tim Shaw PAFs still in here, whereas usually customs don't get those till 81, so if you find one at the tail end of the original, you might have that. But typically when you're talking about these, you'll be talking about T-tops. So that could be a pro or a con. Both pickup sets are fantastic. The first impressions of this one, it seems to actually been taken care of really well. We don't have tons of finished chipping along the inlays, but that's impossible to find a perfect one. Now, unfortunately, the nut's been replaced on that. That's a bummer. I wasn't told about that. But the headstock is the thing that freaks me out the most. It's not the logo change, it's having the Grover tuners. It looks so strange as compared to the Keystones. They're just so small in comparison. I've always been a big fan of this look. But this example was played. You've got a couple of dings along the edge. Maybe it bumped into a different guitar in his collection. Now, as a small aside, is the case a difference? Yes. However, this is not the original one. This is a 90s era case. This would have initially came with a chainsaw Gen 3, whereas the earlier version would have a regular Gibson style Tolex case or a Gen 1 or 2 chainsaw, depending on what year. But what I'm most curious about today is it going to sound like the other maple fretboard customs that we've had, because they've all been excellent. Or does the mahogany neck change everything? Let's go ahead and throw it onto the workbench to take an individual look at its parts and specs to learn a little bit more, and then we'll answer that question with a tone sample. Inside our new blonde beauty friend, I saw a few other differences that we can talk about. So first off, Gibson rediscovers how to do the top carve in 1980, and it slowly works its way along the other models. So you can see this one has a little bit more of a belly to it as compared to the 70s versions that are relatively flat in comparison. But let's verify these pickups. There's no date stamp, so it can't be a Shaw, right? No, it's incorrect. The last 2 years, they didn't do the date stamps. So this is correct for a circa 85, 86 Tim Shaw. What you want to look for are these little brass screws right here. That's your first sign that you have a Tim Shaw. If you don't have that, no Shaw. But to verify further, you could take off your cover by breaking your solder joints and checking for the white spacers, as well as your magnets, etc. But the bridge pickup is looking the exact same, and our readings within the circuit are great. 7.74 k ohms in the bridge, 7.58 in the neck, and together 3.83. 7.1 to 7.8 is usually the range on them, with 7.5 being that sweet spot. But now let's look inside our pickup cavities. Our neck one has nat written in it, which means natural. You really didn't find that many natural customs in the 80s. They do exist, but I suppose that's another kind of cool thing about this one. And then it looks like it says RH in here, maybe right hand. They didn't make that many lefties, so maybe it's an employee sign off or something. But look at this. Now compare it to the other ones we've documented. When they switch to the CNC routing, when they do the whole weight relief, they take more out of the guitar for that channel, as you used to just barely be able to fit all these wires. But by widening that out, you can also take more weight out of it, on top of the 9-hole weight relief that they put into the body. But we're still within the 3-piece top era. When does Gibson stop using 3-piece tops? It's somewhere in the early 90s. Like, you can actually find 3-pieces all the way until the mid-90s, but as far as like the standards are concerned, that transition happens in the 90s. But our bridge is a regular Nashville style, still Schaller made in Germany, and we have full weight tail pieces. This one has a little bit of gold tarnishing to it, but is the original one. But here's another difference between 70s and 80s. They changed the knobs. Now, whether it's the manufacturer changing stuff or Gibson changing their supplier, they stop aging. I assume they changed it not because of the non-aging properties, but they were cheaper to buy, would be my best guess. So how do you verify they're original if they don't blacklight or age? Well, you gotta look at the font. You see how squished the 0 is and how bold the numbers look? That's just something you have to train your eye to see. Now, unfortunately, this one right here, you see, it's not as squished. That is a replaced knob on this particular example. That's one of those fine detail type things. Personally, I like the aging of the knobs, so that's kind of a bummer about the mid-80s customs, but, you know, it is what it is. You win some, you lose some with these. But now, the pickguard is so strange on this guitar. So by itself, yeah, it looks fine. It's got some scratches. It cleaned up okay. But when it's on the guitar, it covers up the binding significantly. I noticed that in the seller's photo, so I thought, yeah, pickguard's probably been replaced. But I did a few comparisons to similar era customs, and sure enough, I think there is a small variation. Because look right here, even where the screw normally is located is offset. Because normally it's like right there, but this one's a little bit closer up there. So yeah, I think that comes down to Gibson changing plastic suppliers. That's my best guess anyway. Because the only other explanation I have is this shipped without a pickguard and somebody installed that one later on. But since I've seen other examples similar, I do believe it is original. Now you might ask, why was my cleaning segment so long on this guitar? Wasn't it actually relatively clean? Yeah, and then I took it out of the case and smelled it. It's like, why does this thing smell like skunk? It was very faint, but occasionally it would hit your nose and be like, what? Did this guy have a pet skunk? No, it's Mary Jane. We'll leave it with that. Thankfully, after my cleaning job, it's a little bit better, but please, if you partake in those activities or smoking or anything like that, disclose it, because there's some guys that are allergic and then you're going to have a return. But I think I've got this one to the point where it's not as noticeable anymore. Strangely enough, the smell lingers longer on the metal parts than it did the finish, but now it's all super shiny. And this has got to be like one of the most boring tops I've ever seen. It's just painfully plain. Like, there's not even a lot of wood grain going on with this one. But hey, it's a 1986 maple fretboard custom. I think I'll hold on to it for a little bit, because besides a little bit of gold wear, an unfortunate ding here and on the back of the neck, it's in phenomenal shape. But now let's move on to our mahogany neck with our maple fretboard. I was pulling all kinds of gunk off of this, but now it's looking pretty good. Frets mildly polished, but the lacquer is surprisingly intact. Though we've got some lacquer chipping around our frets. I mean, that's pretty common, but this one's a little bit uglier. And yeah, this one's not perfect. It has a lacquer chip there, but most of the inlays have not moved too much. I'm curious if the finish might have slightly changed, as this one isn't quite as yellowed as my other example. However, that can also just come down to how was the guitar stored? Was it in its case? Was it by the sun? Many things have an influence on how ambered over the clear coat goes. Does somebody definitely like to play in our cowboy chord area? But I measure a 1.72 inch nut width. That increases to 2.07 at the 12th, 0.84 first fret neck depth, and 0.96 at the 12th. The profiles will be similar as compared to 70s versus the 80s. However, I would argue maybe this one is a little bit more rounded. Yeah, you can see what I was talking about being more rounded here. It's that ultra C shape. So that might be another reason why you seek out one of these 80s ones. But if you're curious how I know this is not the original nut, it's because it does not have lacquer over it, and you can see where somebody scored it. That's the reason I'm not saying I'm going to keep this one forever, because if another clean one shows up from this era that doesn't have that, I'll probably swap it out one day, because that is an irreversible modification. But now our headstock. We have more truss rod trouble? Yes, but not the bad kind. So this is one of those truss rods where you can't actually loosen it, which isn't usually a problem unless your neck is doing this. Typically, necks will need straightened out from this. So you've got all the adjustment in the world to do that, meaning you can just take the nut off. But what's funny about this hex nut is you can see we're in this era, the beginning of the Henry J, where they just planed the headstocks with the nut on it, so they cause these flat spots on them. So if you ever see a nut that's sheared like that to match the angle of the headstock, now you know why. But the headstock in general is really good shape on this one. Cool Gibson logo, nice giant mother of pearl custom badge, and once again, our Grover tuners. Now she's looking nice, all put back together, got fresh strings on, but I picked it up to play it, and oh man, that looks so strange being able to see the mahogany neck with your kind of creamy looking fretboard. It's the same look as the side profile shot that we're used to. It's just so strange as compared to the look of the other ones we've been documenting recently. I might say, hey Trogly, you've done the 2010s era ones. You gotta remember, this one has my preferred lacquered maple fretboard, so it looks completely different, because those ones have more of like a white maple look to it because of that. This is cool, reminds me of a piece of chocolate. But moving on to the back, we have a little bit of a mystery. So another difference between the 70s and mid 80s version is they've just started to phase out that whole shielding tin that goes over your back plates. We're talking the outer cover of it. Usually the pots are still on that plate though, so I don't know what's going on with this one, because the solder work looks impeccable to me, and all the pots do date to where I would expect them to be. This is the easiest to read, 1986, 35th week of the year. So I don't think this has been rewired at some point, but it is possible somebody just wanted to remove that base plate, or someone at the factory forgot. I don't know if that's a possibility or not. But another difference is a ground wire, so that's good to know. But here you can see the large CNC route through the body, and we've got our metal output jack plate. You've got a regular strap button down here, and another one in our usual location. And oh my goodness, I forgot to show you the pancake body. The hidden layer is in fact still there in 1986. In fact, I've seen some all the way into the 90s, so I'm betting it happened somewhere around the time that they switched from the 3-piece top end to the 2-piece. So nearly mid-90s, potentially. I think it just varies, but it is not visible on the side because you got the thick binding in the cutaway. You can see they didn't go too crazy with the yellow grain fill in 86. I haven't documented many natural guitars from that era, so I'm not sure when they start to cool that off. But there's our ding on the edge again. And a look at our toggle switch cavity route. Now we move on to the back side of the neck. There's the other ding this guitar has. Rather unfortunate, but wow, you hardly even feel that. That looks about 10 times worse than it actually is. But I'm betting this will blacklight very evenly. But the tuner's cleaned up very nicely. But we've got our Made in USA stamp, and this one dates to the 276th day of 1986, production number 520, which means it was the 21st guitar stamped in Nashville that day, because there is a 500 digit. And Kalamazoo was officially no longer in production. So that's another area where, yeah, it could be a difference depending on if you have one of the early maple fretboard ones that Kalamazoo was doing. But now let's do that blacklight test. It's a gorgeous even glow. You can tell this one hasn't been played all that much. But right here you can see where there still is some chipping around the inlays. It's just inevitable when you finish it over because the inlays and wood move at different rates. That's definitely the worst area, and whatever was going on around those frets. But our headstock's looking beautiful, as is the back side of the body. And I don't see any funny business with our heel. The edges are looking quite nice on both sides. Man, not even stand rash? That's impressive. There you can see that ding again. And okay, there's a little bit of a nitro burn or something right there. Maybe a strap reacted to it. And our other ding, but thankfully no funny business around our headstock area. But always good to blacklight a vintage guitar because you never know what you're going to find. And oh man, get a hold of this weight. 9 pounds, 5 ounces. Yeah, sure, we're within the weight relief era, and that really doesn't seem like it'd be a weight relieved guitar, but it feels so much lighter than my other one. So I'm really glad we tore this thing apart. We found so many differences. They might look similar from the front, but you gotta take into consideration everything about these. But let's go ahead, plug this one in, and hear how it sounds with its Tim Shaw PAFs. So far, I'm really digging this neck pickup. It can really drive your amp, but it doesn't really get that muddy. The bridge is a bit thin clean. But usually that translates well with distortion. But they play nicely together. Just as a quick comparison, I'll do the maple neck version, but remember, the nut material's different. This one was made in Kalamazoo. It's got T-tops versus the Tim Shaws. It's not really just the neck comparisons, but just for fun. So there we go, a 1986 Blonde Beauty custom with the mahogany neck this time. Which one did you guys prefer, mahogany neck or the maple one? T-Tops versus Tim Shaw's, there's a lot of different comparisons there. For me, I think the 70s version has more of a vintage tone to it, whereas this is still nice and hard rocky, but it's a little bit more focused. At least that's what I heard in the room. But as far as playability, I actually preferred the 86 because A, it's like a whole pound and a half lighter than this guy, but B, I feel like they didn't put quite as much lacquer on these fretboards. It's still lacquered, but as compared to what you see over here, they seem to have just been a little bit heavier done. But maybe that just varies example to example. Something about the 86 just looks a little bit more modern because you don't have all the quirky Norland features to it. So if you prefer a more modern custom, but you want some age to it, I think that's who the 86 run is for. If I had to choose just one to play long term at a gig, it would probably be this one. But I'm happy now. We've got reviews and documentations of all of the main iterations of the maple fretboarded Les Paul Custom. They're not for everyone, but I think they sound nice, bright, and snappy, and they do inspire me to play. So I certainly enjoy them. So we'll have to see if we can find some other colors to document. But alright, Troglodytes, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care. If you enjoyed this episode, you might enjoy checking out this next one. It's a Zakk Wylde signature donning a maple fretboard.